I'm Howard Wilson. Christmas Eve night last year, my daughter-in-law Rebecca publicly called me a freeloader in front of 12 family members. I had spent 22 years sacrificing everything for my son Brian and his family. 22 years thinking that was what love looked like between father and son. But when Rebecca announced that I contribute nothing except taking up space, and Brian agreed, telling me, "Dad, just shut up and stop embarrassing us," I felt like I'd been slapped across the face. Nobody defended me. Nobody mentioned the $750,000 house I'd bought them, or the $920,000 I'd spent over 2 decades. I left that dinner table in complete silence. And for the first time in my life, I decided to take back what belonged to me. But before I tell you what happened next, let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and if you've ever felt unappreciated by family, it started so differently. Oh, Margaret and I raised Brian with so much love, so much hope. We were that family everyone envied. Sunday dinners, family vacations, little league games where we cheered the loudest. Margaret used to say Brian had my stubborn streak, but her gentle heart. We thought we'd done everything right. When Margaret lost her battle with breast cancer, Brian was only 20. I held her hand in that sterile hospital room, promising I'd never let our son want for anything. The chemotherapy had stolen her hair, her strength, but not her worry about Brian's future. "Take care of our boy," she whispered. Those were among her last words. I made a vow that night, sitting beside her hospital bed, listening to machines beep their mechanical rhythm. I would be both mother and father to Brian. I would sacrifice whatever it took to give him the life Margaret and I had dreamed of for him. But I didn't know how that generosity would eventually be twisted against me. After Margaret's funeral, I threw myself into providing for Brian. I worked double shifts at the construction company, picked up weekend jobs doing electrical work for neighbors. My hands were permanently stained with sawdust and wire cuts, but I didn't mind. Every blister was for Brian's college fund. I turned down 3 opportunities to remarry. Good women, kind women who might have brought warmth back into our empty house. But I told myself Brian needed my full attention, my complete focus. He was already grieving his mother. He didn't need the confusion of a stepmother. I ate cereal for dinner most nights so Brian could have proper meals. I drove a 15-year-old pickup truck held together with duct tape and prayers while Brian got a reliable Honda for his 16th birthday. When his friends went to expensive summer camps, Brian went too, even though each week cost me a month's overtime pay. Looking back, I can see the pattern forming. I was teaching him that love meant someone always sacrificing for someone else. I was teaching him that he deserved to be taken care of, no questions asked. I didn't realize I was also teaching him to take that sacrifice for granted. Brian met Rebecca during his senior year at college. She worked in the admissions office. Smart, ambitious, with blonde hair she wore in a tight ponytail, and eyes that never quite warmed when she looked at me. From the very first family dinner, I felt like she was evaluating me, finding me lacking somehow. "Your dad still does your laundry?" she asked Brian one Sunday, her voice carrying just enough surprise to make it sound like criticism. Brian laughed nervously, but he didn't defend our arrangement. He just shrugged and said, "He likes helping out." Rebecca had opinions about everything. The way I cooked pot roast, the decorations in our living room, even the brand of coffee I bought. She never said anything directly rude, but there was always this undercurrent of judgment, like I wasn't sophisticated enough for her son. I bit my tongue because I wanted Brian to be happy. If Rebecca made him smile the way he used to before Margaret died, then I could learn to live with her cold politeness. I could adapt to her silent criticisms. What I couldn't see then was how she was slowly convincing Brian that I was holding him back instead of holding him up. When Brian announced their engagement, I knew exactly what I wanted to give them. Margaret and I had always dreamed of buying a house for our son when he got married. We'd started saving for it before Brian could even walk, putting away $20 here, $50 there, building toward that dream. After Margaret died, I'd continued saving, working extra jobs, living in our small rental while building up enough for a real down payment. $750,000. Enough for a beautiful 4-bedroom house in the safe neighborhood where Brian and Rebecca wanted to live. My lawyer, Jennifer Adams, suggested I keep the deed in my name initially. "The tax implications are complex," she explained, shuffling through papers in her downtown office. "If you transfer it immediately, you'll hit gift tax limits. Wait a couple years, let them get established, then we can do the transfer cleanly." It seemed like smart advice. Brian and Rebecca would have their dream home, and we'd handle the paperwork details later. I signed the mortgage documents, my name going on every line, while dreaming about the grandchildren who would grow up in those bedrooms. I had no idea those signatures would eventually become my salvation. But that was just the beginning of 22 years of giving without asking for anything in return. The house was perfect, everything young couples dream about. 4 bedrooms with hardwood floors, a 2-car garage, and a backyard big enough for the children I hoped they'd give me. It sat in Meadowbrook Estates, where the lawn stayed green year-round, and the mail came twice a day. I remember walking through it with the realtor, imagining Brian barbecuing on the back deck, while Rebecca gardened in the flower beds. I could almost hear the sound of grandchildren's laughter echoing through those empty rooms. The down payment cleaned out my savings account. The mortgage meant I'd be working until I was 70, maybe beyond. But when I handed Brian and Rebecca those house keys on their wedding day, watching their faces light up with pure joy, every sacrifice felt worth it. "Dad, this is incredible," Brian said, tears actually forming in his eyes. "I can't believe you did this for us." Rebecca hugged me, the first real warmth I'd ever felt from her. "Thank you, Howard," she whispered. "This means everything." For a moment, I felt like I'd gotten my family back, like we were building something beautiful together. The deed stayed in my name, just temporarily. Jennifer Adams had all the legal documents locked in her office safe. "We'll transfer ownership once the tax year rolls over," she'd assured me. "Everything's properly documented." I never imagined I'd need those documents to protect myself from my own son. But buying the house was just the beginning. Young couples need help getting established, I told myself. The mortgage payments came out of my account every month, $2,800, like clockwork. Property taxes, homeowners insurance, maintenance costs. I covered it all. When their first child came, Rebecca quit her job to stay home. "Just until the baby's older," she said. But months turned into years. I found myself paying for groceries, utility bills, even their cell phone plans. They needed reliable internet for Brian's work. They needed a good pediatrician for little Emma. They needed a safe car when the Honda finally died. Every expense seemed reasonable by itself. A couple hundred here for daycare, 1,000 there for Emma's preschool, 500 for Rebecca's dental work because their insurance didn't cover it, 2,500 when the air conditioning died in July. I kept detailed records of everything, bank transfers, receipts, canceled checks. My accountant said it was good practice in case they ever wanted to pay me back. I just thought it was responsible bookkeeping. Over 22 years, the total reached $920,000, almost $1 million flowing from my accounts to support their comfortable lifestyle. Every month, I'd balance my checkbook and see those numbers growing. But I'd also see Brian posting Facebook photos of family vacations, Rebecca's new jewelry, Emma's expensive dance lessons. I thought I was building their happiness. I didn't realize I was buying my own irrelevance. Jennifer Adams had insisted on proper documentation from the beginning. Family money can get complicated. She'd warned me during one of our quarterly meetings. You want everything clear in case questions come up later. So I kept everything. Bank transfer confirmations showing mortgage payments, receipts for every repair, every upgrade, every emergency expense, canceled checks for property taxes and insurance premiums, a complete financial history of 22 years of support. It all went into a manila folder in my safe deposit box at First National Bank. The folder grew thicker each year, statements and receipts and legal documents forming a paper mountain of generosity. I visited that box every few months, adding new documentation, never imagining I'd need to use it as evidence. The original deed was there too, crisp and official, with my name clearly printed as sole owner. Brian and Rebecca had never seen it. They'd just taken the house keys and assumed everything was in their names. Why would they think otherwise? Jennifer had reminded me every year about transferring the title. "We should really get this done," she'd say, pulling out the transfer paperwork. But something always came up. Rebecca was pregnant. Brian was changing jobs. The tax implications weren't favorable that year. Now I realized something deeper was holding me back. Some instinct was telling me to wait, to keep control, to protect myself. I didn't know those papers would eventually save me from the people I'd spent my life protecting. The changes started small. Rebecca began making comments about how independent they wanted to be. She'd thank me for paying for things, but there was something different in her voice, like she was reminding me that I was helping instead of just participating in family life. Brian started agreeing with her more, nodding when she talked about not wanting to be a burden on me. But they never actually refused my help. They just made sure I knew they were aware they were receiving it. Family dinners became less frequent. When I did come over, conversation felt forced. Rebecca would compliment me on my shirt, then immediately ask Brian about work projects I knew nothing about. I started feeling like a guest in the house I was paying for. "Maybe you should think about dating again," Rebecca suggested one Sunday afternoon. "You've spent so many years taking care of us. You deserve a life of your own." The words were kind, but the message was clear. They wanted me to step back, to become less involved in their daily lives. They wanted the financial support to continue, but they wanted the emotional connection to fade. I was becoming a checkbook with legs instead of a father and grandfather, but I told myself it was natural. Young families need space to grow. I was probably being too involved, too present in their lives. I had no idea I was being trained to accept my own marginalization. The first real blow came on Thanksgiving Day 3 years ago. I'd brought my traditional sweet potato casserole, the recipe Margaret used to make, with marshmallows and brown sugar the way Emma loved it. I was setting it on the counter when Rebecca made her announcement. "Howard really doesn't contribute much anymore," she said to her sister, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I mean, we appreciate the occasional help, but mostly he just shows up." The words hit me like cold water. I stood there holding the casserole dish, my hands suddenly shaking. "I pay your mortgage," I said quietly. "I pay your insurance, your property taxes." Rebecca laughed, a sharp sound that cut through the kitchen noise. "Oh, Howard, you make it sound like you're supporting us. We've been handling our own finances for years." I looked at Brian, waiting for him to correct her, to acknowledge the truth. He was carving the turkey, his back to both of us. "Dad, just let it go," he said without turning around. "Rebecca's just trying to establish some boundaries." Boundaries. As if 22 years of sacrifice were something to establish boundaries against. I ate dinner in silence that day, tasting nothing, feeling invisible at the table I'd helped pay for. For the first time, my own son hadn't defended me when I was being attacked. My 69th birthday came and went without a word from Brian or Rebecca, not a phone call, not a text message, not even a Facebook post. I waited all day, checking my phone every few minutes, telling myself they were planning something special. At 8 o'clock that evening, I drove to the grocery store and bought myself a small chocolate cake. I sat at my kitchen table singing happy birthday to myself in a voice that cracked on the high notes. The cake was too sweet, but I ate 3 pieces anyway, washing them down with coffee that had gone cold. 2 days later, Brian called. "Oh man, Dad, I'm so sorry. Work has been crazy and Rebecca's been dealing with Emma's school situation. We totally spaced on your birthday." Spaced. 69 years of life and they'd spaced on it. "We'll make it up to you," Brian promised. "How about dinner this weekend? Our treat." But the weekend came and went. Then another week. Then a month. The makeup dinner never happened, and eventually it stopped being mentioned at all. I realized I'd become so peripheral to their lives that my birthday, the anniversary of the day I'd entered this world and eventually become their father, wasn't worth remembering. The sweet taste of that grocery store cake stayed in my mouth for weeks. The neighborhood barbecue in July was when things escalated from neglect to active embarrassment. Rebecca was talking to the Hendersons from down the street, and I was trying to join the conversation about local politics when she cut me off mid-sentence. "Howard has some very outdated opinions about these things," she announced with a laugh that didn't reach her eyes. "He's still stuck in the past on most social issues." I felt my face flush hot in the summer heat. "I was just saying that the new traffic light might help with—" "Dad," Brian interrupted, walking over with a beer in his hand. "Dad, you're embarrassing us. These are our neighbors. We have to live here." Embarrassing them by expressing an opinion about traffic safety in front of people who'd known me for 20 years, who'd watched me help Brian move into the house, who'd seen me teaching Emma to ride her bicycle in their driveway. I walked back to my truck and sat in the driver's seat for 30 minutes, air conditioning blasting, hands gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. Through the windshield, I could see Brian and Rebecca laughing with the Hendersons, the conversation flowing smoothly without my embarrassing presence. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering when I'd transformed from beloved father to family burden. But that wasn't even close to the worst of it. After the barbecue, I started questioning everything. I'd spend hours sitting in my small apartment, looking through photo albums from when Brian was young. There we were at his high school graduation, his arm around my shoulders, both of us grinning. There we were at his wedding, dancing together at the reception while Margaret's favorite song played. When had that love turned into obligation? When had my presence become something to manage instead of something to enjoy? I started paying closer attention to how they treated me during visits. Rebecca would glance at her watch when I'd been there more than an hour. Brian would steer conversations away from topics I cared about. Emma, now 15, would disappear into her room whenever I arrived, like I was some boring relative she was forced to tolerate. The worst part was realizing I'd trained them to treat me this way, by always saying yes, by never demanding respect, by accepting whatever scraps of attention they offered. I'd taught them that I was disposable. I found myself driving past the house sometimes, looking at the perfectly maintained lawn, the fresh paint on the shutters, the new cars in the driveway, all paid for with my money, all enjoyed by people who saw me as a burden. I started thinking about those legal documents in my safe deposit box, wondering what would happen if I actually used them. When December arrived, I threw myself into Christmas preparations the way I always had. I spent hours shopping for the perfect gifts: a new tablet for Emma, a cashmere scarf for Rebecca, a leather wallet for Brian. I cooked Margaret's traditional Christmas cookies, her famous fudge recipe, her special stuffing that Brian used to beg for every year. Rebecca's response was less than enthusiastic. "Oh, Howard, you really didn't need to do all this work," she said when I called to coordinate dinner plans. "We were thinking of keeping things simple this year, maybe just immediate family." Immediate family. As if I wasn't Brian's father. As if I wasn't Emma's grandfather. "But I always cook Christmas dinner," I said, my voice smaller than I intended. "I know, and we appreciate it, but Rebecca's parents are coming this year," Brian explained when he called me back. "It might be too crowded with everyone there." Too crowded. In the house I'd bought them. For the holiday I'd celebrated with Brian every year of his life. But I swallowed my hurt and agreed to come for dinner instead of cooking it. I told myself that families evolve, that traditions change, that I needed to be flexible. I had no idea that Christmas dinner would change everything forever. I arrived at the house, my house, carrying a bag of carefully wrapped presents and a tray of Margaret's Christmas cookies. Rebecca's parents, Tom and Linda, were already there, along with her brother Mark and his wife Sarah. The living room buzzed with conversation and laughter that seemed to pause when I walked in. "Howard!" Rebecca's mother Linda greeted me with the kind of overly bright smile reserved for unwelcome guests. "How wonderful that you could join us." Join them, in the house I owned. I found a spot on the couch next to Emma, who was absorbed in her phone and barely acknowledged my arrival. Brian was in the kitchen helping Rebecca with dinner preparations, both of them moving with the synchronized efficiency of a team that didn't include me. The conversation flowed around me like water around a stone. Tom shared stories about his golf game. Mark talked about his promotion at work. Sarah showed photos from their recent cruise to Alaska. When I tried to contribute mentioning my own vacation plans or asking about their trip, the responses were polite but brief, followed by immediate topic changes. I sat there holding my coffee cup, watching my family interact with Rebecca's family like they were the real relatives, while I was some distant acquaintance invited out of obligation. The exclusion was subtle but unmistakable. I was being tolerated, not welcomed. Dinner conversation started innocently enough. Tom was talking about retirement communities, how nice some of the new ones were, how they offered independence for seniors while providing necessary support services. "It's really about quality of life," Linda added, cutting her turkey with surgical precision. "Staying in places that are too big, too expensive to maintain, that's not fair to anyone." I felt my stomach tighten. Were they talking about me? About my living situation? "Some people," Rebecca said, not looking directly at me, "have trouble recognizing when it's time to make changes. They get stuck in old patterns, old arrangements that don't work anymore." The table went quiet except for the sound of silverware against plates. Emma was texting under the table. Brian was studying his mashed potatoes like they contained the secrets of the universe. "I think everyone deserves to live independently," Mark chimed in. "To feel like they're contributing instead of just taking up space. Taking up space. In my own house." I tried to speak, to defend myself, to remind them of everything I'd contributed. "I think there might be some misunderstanding about—" "Howard!" Rebecca interrupted, her voice sharp with authority. "We're trying to have a family discussion here." They were discussing my future like I wasn't sitting right there. Like I was a problem to be solved instead of a person to be respected. That's when Rebecca's restraint finally broke. 22 years of resentment came pouring out in front of the entire table. "You want to know the truth?" she said, her voice rising. "Howard's been freeloading off us for years. We pay for everything, groceries, utilities, maintenance, while he just sits around acting like he's doing us favors." My blood turned to ice. "Rebecca, that's not—" "Don't interrupt me," she snapped. "We're adults. We have our own family. We don't need someone constantly hovering around, making suggestions, acting like he still runs our lives." I could feel everyone staring at me. Emma had finally looked up from her phone, her eyes wide. Tom and Linda were frozen with their forks halfway to their mouths. Mark and Sarah exchanged uncomfortable glances. "I bought this house," I said quietly, my voice shaking. "I pay the mortgage, I pay the insurance, I pay the property taxes." Rebecca laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Oh, please, that was 20 years ago. You think one gift means we owe you forever? You think money gives you the right to never leave us alone?" My heart was hammering against my ribs. My hands were trembling so badly I had to put down my water glass. Blood was roaring in my ears, drowning out everything except Rebecca's voice getting louder and meaner. "We're tired of pretending you're not a burden." I tried to explain. I tried to tell them about the mortgage payments that came out of my account every month, about the insurance policies in my name, about the property taxes I'd paid for 22 years. I tried to make them understand that I wasn't taking from them. I was still giving to them, even now. But my voice was shaking, my words coming out jumbled and desperate. I sounded like an old man making excuses instead of a father stating facts. "Dad," Brian said, his voice cutting through my explanation like a blade. "Dad, just shut up!" The room went dead silent. Even the grandfather clock in the hallway seemed to stop ticking. "Stop embarrassing us," he continued, his face flushed with anger and shame. "Can't you see that nobody wants to hear this? Nobody wants to hear your guilt trips and your martyrdom? Shut up. My own son, the boy I'd raised alone after his mother died, the young man I'd sacrificed everything for, the father I'd helped become the man he was, had told me to shut up, in front of his wife's entire family, on Christmas Day. Something inside me died in that moment, and something else was born. I stood up from the table, completely silent. Not another word, not another explanation, not another desperate attempt to make them understand what they refused to see. I walked to the front closet, took my coat, and left. I drove for 3 hours that night, no destination in mind, just moving through empty streets while my mind processed what had happened. The Christmas lights blurred past my windshield, red and green smears that reminded me of happier times when Brian was small, and Christmas meant magic instead of humiliation. My hands were still shaking on the steering wheel. Every few minutes I'd hear Brian's voice again, "Just shut up!" And my chest would tighten like someone was squeezing my heart with their fist. I ended up in the parking lot of a 24-hour diner, sitting in my truck with the engine running, staring at families through the windows. Normal families sharing late-night breakfast, laughing together, treating each other with basic human kindness. When had I become the enemy in my own family's story? When had love become something I gave and never received? When had respect become something I'd forgotten to demand? The cold December air felt sharp against my face when I finally stepped out of the truck. Each breath formed clouds that disappeared quickly, like all the words I should have said but didn't, like all the boundaries I should have set but never did. I was done being invisible. I was done being taken for granted. The highway stretched empty before me, nothing but darkness, and the occasional truck carrying goods to people who probably appreciated them more than my family appreciated me. I thought about Margaret, wondering what she would say about how our son had turned out. She'd always worried that we were spoiling Brian, giving him too much without teaching him gratitude. Love has to include accountability, she used to say when Brian would throw tantrums as a child. Otherwise, it's not really love, it's just enabling. I dismissed her concerns back then. I thought love meant always saying yes, always providing, always putting his needs before my own. I thought being a good father meant never disappointing my child, never making him face consequences, never letting him fail. But I'd been wrong. I'd raised a man who felt entitled to disrespect the person who'd sacrificed everything for him. I'd taught him that love was one-sided, that some people existed only to give while others existed only to take. Margaret had been right. Love without boundaries isn't love at all. It's just a different kind of abuse. And I'd been abusing myself for 22 years, telling myself it was virtue. Monday morning I walked into First National Bank with purpose I hadn't felt in years. The safe deposit box key felt heavy in my hand, weighted with possibilities I'd never considered before. Working on some year-end financial planning? Asked Janet, the bank manager who'd known me for decades. Something like that, I replied. The box contained everything. The original deed with my name clearly listed as sole owner. Mortgage payment records going back 22 years. Property tax receipts. Insurance policy documents. Bank transfer records showing $920,000 in support over 2 decades. I spread the documents across the small table in the private viewing room, creating a paper trail that told the story of a father's generosity and a family's ingratitude. Each receipt was evidence. Each canceled check was proof. Each bank statement was a witness to my sacrifice. These pieces of paper held more power than 22 years of words ever had. They were facts that couldn't be argued with. Truth that couldn't be twisted, reality that couldn't be denied. Jennifer Adams had been right to insist on proper documentation. Those boring legal details I'd barely paid attention to were about to become my salvation. I called Jennifer that afternoon. I need to discuss the property situation with my son's house, I said, my voice steadier than it had been in months. Of course, Howard. Are you finally ready to transfer the deed? Not exactly. There was a pause. Jennifer had been my lawyer long enough to recognize when a client's voice carried more weight than usual. Would you like to come in tomorrow morning? We should discuss this properly. That night, I sat in my small apartment looking through photo albums one last time. Brian at 5, gap-toothed and grinning, holding up a fish we'd caught together. Brian at 16, proud and nervous in his graduation cap. Brian at 25, dancing with Rebecca at their wedding while I watched from the sidelines, already learning my place. The photos told the story of a relationship that had been dying slowly for years, killed by kindness and buried under obligation. I wasn't seeking revenge. I was seeking balance. I was seeking respect. I was seeking the basic human dignity that every person deserves, regardless of how much they've given or how much they love. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let people face the consequences of their choices. Tomorrow I would start teaching that lesson. Jennifer Adams's office hadn't changed in 20 years. Same oak desk, same leather chairs, same smell of old law books and expensive coffee. But I felt different sitting across from her that Tuesday morning. For the first time in decades, I wasn't there to give something away. Tell me what's happened, Jennifer said, her voice gentle but professional. I laid out the documents on her desk, the deed, the mortgage records, the payment history. Then I told her about Christmas dinner, about Rebecca's accusations, about Brian's command to shut up. My voice stayed steady as I recounted 22 years of gradual disrespect, culminating in public humiliation. Jennifer studied the paperwork with the focused attention of someone who understood exactly what she was seeing. Howard, you realize you have complete legal ownership of this property? They have no claim whatsoever. I know. You could require them to pay fair market rent, or you could begin eviction proceedings immediately. This is your house, not theirs. The words felt strange in my ears. My house. After 22 years of thinking of it as their house, of tiptoeing around their preferences, of accepting their treatment of me as a barely tolerated guest. What would fair market rent be? I asked. Jennifer consulted her computer. 4-bedroom house in Meadowbrook Estates, $3,500 a month minimum. $3,500 every month. For 22 years, I'd been giving them that much and more, never asking for gratitude, never demanding respect. What do you want to do, Howard? I looked at those legal documents, my name, my signatures, my rights. I want to send them a notice. The legal notice was beautifully simple. 2 pages of formal language that boiled down to a basic truth. Pay $3,500 per month in rent, or vacate the premises within 30 days. Jennifer's paralegal, an efficient woman named Carol, handled the certified mail paperwork. This will require signature confirmation, she explained. They'll have to sign for it personally. I drove to Meadowbrook Estates that Thursday afternoon and parked across the street, watching the mail truck make its rounds. When it stopped at my house, their house, I felt my heart rate spike. The mailman walked to the front door, rang the bell, waited. Rebecca answered, still in her bathrobe at 2 in the afternoon. She signed for the envelope without really looking at it. The way people do when they're expecting a package or a holiday card from a distant relative. She had no idea she was signing for the end of her comfortable world. I watched her close the door, the white envelope in her hand looking innocent and ordinary, just another piece of mail in a day full of mail. But inside that envelope was a legal earthquake that would shake the foundation of everything they thought they knew about their lives. 22 years of taking me for granted were about to end with a signature. That evening I made myself a simple dinner and ate it slowly, savoring each bite. For the first time in months, food actually had flavor again. The phone didn't ring that night. They probably hadn't opened the envelope yet, but tomorrow would be different. The call came at 7:38 Friday morning. I was drinking coffee and reading the newspaper, enjoying the quiet of a life without obligations to ungrateful people. "Dad?" Brian's voice was confused, almost panicked. "Dad, we got this crazy letter from some lawyer. It says we have to pay rent or move out. This has to be a mistake." I set down my coffee cup carefully. "No mistake, son." "What do you mean, no mistake?" "Dad, this is our house. We live here. We've lived here for 22 years.
"You've lived there for 22 years, I corrected him. "But it's my house. It's always been my house. I bought it. I pay for it. My name is on the deed." Silence. I could hear Rebecca in the background, her voice sharp with questions Brian couldn't answer. But Dad, you gave us this house as a wedding gift. I let you live in my house as a gift. I never gave you the house itself. There's a difference." More silence. Then, "Dad, you can't be serious. Where are we supposed to go? We can't afford $3,500 a month in rent. Emma's in school here. This is our neighborhood." "Then I suggest you figure it out quickly. You have 30 days. "Dad, please, can we talk about this? Can we work something out?" For 22 years, I'd been working things out in their favor. I'd been compromising, accommodating, sacrificing. "The notice is legal and binding," I said. "If you want to discuss terms, call Jennifer Adams. Her number's on the letterhead." I hung up the phone. The calls started coming every hour after that. Brian, Rebecca, even Emma, crying and asking why Grandpa was being so mean. Each conversation followed the same pattern: disbelief, anger, bargaining, threats. "You can't do this to us," Rebecca screamed during one particularly heated call. "We have rights. We've been living here for decades." "Check with a lawyer," I replied calmly. "You'll find that tenants have very few rights when they've never paid rent and have no lease agreement." "Tenants?" she shrieked. "We're not tenants. We're family. Family members who told me to shut up and called me a freeloader on Christmas Day." That seemed to penetrate her anger for a moment. The line went quiet except for her breathing. "Howard," she said, her voice suddenly smaller. "I was upset. It was a stressful day. I didn't mean—" "You meant every word," I interrupted. "And so do I." By the end of the week, I'd received 17 calls, 43 text messages, and 6 voicemails. The desperation in their voices grew with each contact. The reality was sinking in. They couldn't afford to pay me rent. They couldn't afford to move, and they couldn't afford a lawyer to fight me. I turned off my phone Friday evening and enjoyed the most peaceful weekend I'd had in years. Monday would bring the next phase of their education and consequences. 3 weeks into their 30-day notice, I drove to the house one last time to collect my belongings. The for rent sign Jennifer had recommended wasn't up yet. Brian and Rebecca were still hoping for a miracle that wasn't coming. My key still worked, of course. It was my house. I moved through rooms that held 22 years of memories, taking only what belonged to me.
the photo of Margaret and me on our wedding day, the watch she'd given me for our 15th anniversary, the small wooden box where I kept her wedding ring. I left the family photos on the mantle, pictures of Brian's childhood, his graduation, his wedding. Those memories belong to the family we used to be, not the strangers we'd become. Each item I packed felt like a small goodbye. The coffee mug Margaret had bought me that said "World's Best Dad." The books I'd collected over decades. The electric razor Brian had given me for Father's Day 15 years ago, back when he still thought I deserved gifts instead of just obligations. The house felt different now, emptier, like it was already mourning the life that was ending within its walls. I walked through each room slowly, noting the scuff marks on the hardwood floors I'd paid to install, the wear patterns on the carpet I'd replaced twice, the small nail holes in the walls where family photos used to hang. The kitchen still smelled faintly of the Christmas dinner where everything had collapsed. The dining room table sat empty, chairs pushed in neatly, waiting for family meals that would never happen again. In Emma's room, I saw the desk where I'd helped her with homework for years, back when she still hugged me hello and told me about her school friends. Her stuffed animals sat on shelves I'd built myself, watching me with button eyes that held no judgment. The master bedroom where Brian and Rebecca slept looked the same as always, neat, comfortable. The bed I'd helped them pick out covered with sheets I'd helped them buy. These walls had witnessed so much love, so much hope, so much gradual disappointment. Now they would witness the consequences of taking that love for granted. My new apartment was small but clean. One bedroom, one bathroom, a kitchen just big enough for a man who ate most meals alone. The rent was $800 a month, less than a quarter of what Brian and Rebecca now owed me. I arranged my furniture carefully in the limited space. Margaret's rocking chair by the window where morning light would find it. Our wedding photo on the bedside table. The coffee maker that still worked perfectly after 15 years. For the first time since Margaret died, I was living somewhere that belonged entirely to me. No one could tell me how to decorate, when to visit, whether my opinions were welcome. No one could make me feel like a burden in my own space. The silence was profound. No television in the background, no teenage music bleeding through the walls, no conversations about people I wasn't allowed to have opinions about. Just peace, just quiet. Just the sound of my own breathing in a space where I controlled every decision. It felt like freedom. 3 weeks passed without contact. I established routines that belonged only to me. Morning coffee while reading the newspaper cover to cover, afternoon walks through neighborhoods where no one knew my story, evening dinners at restaurants where I could order whatever I wanted without accommodating anyone else's preferences. I discovered I liked documentaries about history. I learned to cook simple meals that satisfied me completely. I started reading mystery novels, something Margaret had never enjoyed. My phone sat silent on the kitchen counter. No desperate calls from Brian. No manipulative voicemails from Rebecca. No guilt-laden texts about how much Emma missed her grandfather. The silence felt clean, like fresh air after years of breathing poison. Then on a Thursday evening while I was reading about ancient Rome, the phone rang. Not the usual rapid-fire desperation calls. This ring sounded different, urgent but controlled. I let it go to voicemail. When I finally checked the message 2 hours later, Rebecca's voice was smaller than I'd ever heard it. "Howard, we need to talk. There's been a development." Their 30 days were almost up. The voicemail was just the beginning. By Friday morning, I had 7 messages, each one more desperate than the last. Rebecca's voice cracked as she talked about landlords who wanted first month's rent, last month's rent, and security deposits they couldn't afford. Brian sounded hollow, defeated, listing apartments they'd looked at but couldn't qualify for. "Dad," his voice said through the phone speaker, "we don't know what to do. Every place we've looked at wants proof of income that covers 3 times the rent. Rebecca's been out of work for so long, and my salary alone isn't enough for decent places." They were discovering what I'd known for 22 years. Maintaining their lifestyle required more money than Brian earned. The difference had always come from me. The mortgage, the insurance, the property taxes, the emergency repairs, the extra expenses that crop up when you live in a house instead of an apartment. Without my financial support, they couldn't afford to live the way they'd become accustomed to living. "The moving company wants $8,000, Rebecca's latest message revealed. "Even if we find a place, we don't have money for deposits and moving costs." They were learning the true cost of their comfortable life. The next phase was predictable. Emma called, her 15-year-old voice heavy with tears. "Grandpa, please don't make us move. This is the only home I've ever known. All my friends are here. My school is here." I almost broke hearing her cry. Almost. But then I remembered that Emma had learned to treat me like furniture, too, disappearing when I visited, barely acknowledging my presence at family gatherings. "Your parents should have thought about that before they decided I was a burden," I told her gently. Rebecca's mother, Linda, called next, her voice dripping with the kind of authority that had probably worked for 70 years. "Howard, this is Linda Morrison. I think you're taking this family disagreement too far. Children say things they don't mean. You're being vindictive." "I'm being legal," I replied. "The 30 days are almost up." Then came the neighbors, the Hendersons from down the street, calling to tell me how shocked everyone was that I was kicking my own family out on the street. As if Brian and Rebecca hadn't spent years publicly treating me like an embarrassment. Finally, Brian's old college friends started calling, people I'd helped support through their own difficult times, now lecturing me about family loyalty. Every call revealed how successfully they'd convinced people that I was the villain in the story. On Monday of the final week, Rebecca showed up at my apartment. I watched through the peephole as she stood in the hallway, her clothes wrinkled, her hair unwashed, her face puffy from crying. When I opened the door, she collapsed against the frame like she'd been holding herself up through sheer will. "Howard, please," she whispered. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry about Christmas. I was wrong. I was completely wrong. You've been nothing but generous to us, and I threw it in your face." For a moment I saw the young woman Brian had fallen in love with 22 years ago, vulnerable, scared, human. "I know you hate me," she continued. "I know I've been awful to you, but please don't punish Brian and Emma for my mistakes. Please don't destroy their lives because I'm a terrible person." It was the first time in years that Rebecca had acknowledged my contributions to their family. The first time she'd admitted treating me badly. The first time she'd shown any awareness of how her behavior had affected me. But apologies offered only when consequences arrive aren't really apologies. They're just attempts to escape accountability. "Where was this realization 5 years ago?" I asked quietly. "Where was this awareness last Christmas when you called me a freeloader?" She had no answer for that. Brian came Wednesday evening, alone. He stood in my doorway looking older than his 42 years, the weight of real consequences aging him rapidly. "Dad, I know I've been a terrible son," he said without preamble. "I know I've taken you for granted. I know I've let Rebecca treat you poorly. I know I should have defended you, should have stood up for you, should have protected you the way you always protected me." He was saying everything I'd wanted to hear for years, every word I'd longed for during those cold family dinners, those forgotten birthdays, those moments when I'd felt invisible in my own family. "I love you, Dad," he continued, tears streaming down his face. "I've always loved you. I just got lost somewhere along the way. Please give me a chance to make this right. Please don't let our family end like this." For a moment I wavered. This was my son, the boy I'd raised, the man I'd sacrificed everything for, the child who'd held my hand at his mother's funeral and trusted me to take care of him. But some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt. "I love you too, Brian," I said softly. "But love isn't enough anymore." I closed the door. Thursday afternoon, I sat in my small apartment holding 2 keys. One was brass, worn smooth by 22 years of use, attached to a keychain Emma had made me in 2nd grade. The key to the house on Meadowbrook Estates, the house that had represented all my hopes for family closeness and generational love. The other key was silver, new, sharp-edged, the key to my apartment, to my independence, to the life I was learning to build for myself at 68 years old. 2 keys. 2 completely different lives. The brass key represented everything I'd given, not just money, but pieces of my soul handed over year after year, hoping that generosity would somehow purchase the love and respect I craved. It represented birthdays spent alone, opinions dismissed, contributions forgotten, sacrifices taken for granted. The silver key represented something I'd never had before: boundaries, self-respect, the radical notion that I deserved basic human dignity regardless of how much I'd given or how much I loved. Friday morning, the sheriff's department carried out the eviction. I wasn't there to watch, but Jennifer called to confirm it was complete. They left quietly, she reported. No drama, no damage to the property. They took their belongings and left the keys on the kitchen counter. That evening, I drove to Meadowbrook Estates one final time. The house sat empty, waiting for new tenants who would pay fair market rent and treat the property with respect. The for rent sign stood straight and clean in the front yard. I unlocked the front door with my brass key, walked through the empty rooms one last time, then placed that worn key on the kitchen counter next to the ones Brian and Rebecca had left behind. I locked the door with the spare key Jennifer's office would give to the rental management company, then drove home to my apartment, where I unlocked my door with the silver key that belonged only to me. Pause for a second. What would you have done in my situation? Would you have stayed and tried to work it out, or would you have walked away like I did? Let me know in the comments. That night, I called Margaret's grave, something I'd never done before. The groundskeeper was used to people talking to headstones. I think I finally learned what you meant, I told her marble marker. Love without boundaries isn't love at all. The January rental checks from my new tenants would more than cover my apartment rent. For the first time in my adult life, I was financially independent from people who took me for granted. I still loved Brian. I probably always would. But I'd learned the difference between loving someone and allowing them to abuse that love. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let people face the consequences of their choices. Sometimes respect has to be demanded, not just hoped for. Sometimes family means setting boundaries instead of accepting everything. I'm 68 years old, and I'm finally learning how to live for myself. The silver key in my hand feels like freedom. If you enjoyed this story about setting boundaries and reclaiming dignity, you'll love my other videos about family justice and second chances. Subscribe and hit the bell for more real-life stories that will make you think twice about how we treat the people who love us most.